The Gulf War, a conflict etched in modern history, was a watershed moment for the Middle East and the world. It began on August 2, 1990, when Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces stormed into Kuwait. This small, oil-rich nation was quickly overtaken in hours. The invasion sent shockwaves through the international community. The United Nations swiftly condemned the act, demanding Iraq's immediate withdrawal. The Security Council authorized the use of military force to liberate Kuwait. A US-led coalition, comprising forces from over 30 countries, assembled in the Persian Gulf. Operation Desert Shield aimed to deter further Iraqi aggression and protect Saudi Arabia. However, Saddam Hussein remained defiant, refusing to relinquish his grip on Kuwait. To understand Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, one must delve into the economic quagmire that gripped Baghdad after the Iran-Iraq War. The 8-year conflict, which ended in 1988, had left Iraq's economy in ruins. The country was saddled with a massive foreign debt, estimated to be around $80 billion, much of it owed to its Gulf neighbors, including Kuwait. Iraq's once booming oil industry, the lifeblood of its economy, was devastated. Production had plummeted and revenues were insufficient to cover even basic necessities, let alone service its colossal debt. Unemployment soared and inflation spiraled out of control, eroding the purchasing power of ordinary Iraqis. Saddam Hussein's regime, facing growing internal discontent, desperately sought ways to alleviate the economic pressure. The country was on the verge of collapse, and Hussein saw Kuwait's vast oil wealth as a solution to his problems. He believed that by annexing Kuwait, he could not only erase his debts, but also gain control of a significant portion of the world's oil reserves. This, he calculated, would give him leverage over global oil prices and strengthen his position in the region. Saddam Hussein exploited historical claims to justify his actions, portraying the invasion as a rightful reunification of Iraqi territory.
Kuwait was waging economic warfare against us by exceeding its OPEC oil production quotas, driving down oil prices and depriving Iraq of much-needed revenue. They must compensate us for the oil they stole through slant drilling. Kuwait should cancel our debt. As a brotherly Arab nation, they have a moral obligation to help us.
Saddam Hussein's grievances against Kuwait were multifaceted, stemming from economic desperation, historical revisionism, and a desire for regional dominance. He considered Kuwait an artificial entity carved out of the Basra province of the Ottoman Empire, which Iraq claimed as its own. He argued that Kuwait's ruling Al-Sabah family were illegitimate rulers installed by the British after World War I. Kuwait's oil wealth and strategic location made it an irresistible target for Saddam Hussein's expansionist ambitions. The world reacted with outrage and condemnation to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The United Nations Security Council immediately passed Resolution 660, demanding Iraq's unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait and the restoration of Kuwait's legitimate government. The international community, recognizing the grave threat posed by Saddam Hussein's aggression, rallied behind Kuwait.
The United States, under President George H.W. Bush, took the lead in building a multinational coalition to confront Iraq. The Bush administration, recognizing the strategic importance of the Persian Gulf, adopted a policy of drawing a line in the sand.
The U.S. Congress authorized the use of military force to liberate Kuwait. The Bush administration worked tirelessly to garner international support, building a broad coalition of over 30 countries. This coalition sent a powerful message of global unity against Iraqi aggression. Section 5. Operation Desert Storm, the Allied Counteroffensive. On January 17, 1991, after months of failed diplomatic efforts, Operation Desert Storm commenced.
The initial phase focused on crippling Iraq's military capabilities through relentless aerial bombardment. The coalition air forces, employing advanced weaponry, targeted Iraqi airfields, communication centers, radar installations, and supply lines.
The air campaign, lasting over 5 weeks, effectively neutralized the Iraqi Air Force and weakened its ground forces.
On February 24, 1991, the coalition launched a massive ground assault, led by the United States, into Kuwait and southern Iraq. The ground offensive, spearheaded by heavily armored divisions and supported by overwhelming air power, quickly overwhelmed the Iraqi forces. By February 28, 1991, Just 100 hours after the ground offensive began, Kuwait was liberated, and Iraq agreed to a UN-brokered ceasefire.
Section 6. The Aftermath in Kuwait. Liberation and Reconstruction. The liberation of Kuwait brought immense relief and jubilation to the Kuwaiti people, who had endured 7 months of brutal Iraqi occupation. However, the country was left in ruins.
Retreating Iraqi forces, in a final act of defiance, set fire to hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells, creating an environmental catastrophe. The skies over Kuwait turned black with thick smoke, and oil rained down on the desert, turning it into a toxic wasteland.
The environmental damage was extensive, with long-term consequences for Kuwait's fragile ecosystem. The Kuwaiti government, with assistance from international organizations and companies, embarked on a massive cleanup and reconstruction effort. It took years to extinguish the oil well fires and begin to restore the environment to its pre-war state.
The human cost of the occupation was also significant. Thousands of Kuwaiti civilians were killed or went missing during the Iraqi occupation.
Section 7. Iraq's difficult decade. Sanctions and internal strife. While Kuwait began the long process of rebuilding, Iraq faced a different set of challenges. The country was subject to stringent UN sanctions imposed after the invasion, which crippled its economy and led to widespread hardship among its people.
The sanctions, aimed at preventing Iraq from rebuilding its military capabilities, had a devastating impact on the Iraqi economy. Iraq's oil exports, its primary source of revenue, were severely restricted, leading to a sharp decline in living standards.
The sanctions also had the unintended consequence of strengthening Saddam Hussein's grip on power.
He used the country's oil wealth to enrich himself and his cronies while tightening his control over all aspects of Iraqi society. Section 8. The human cost of war casualties and environmental damage. The Gulf War, though relatively short-lived, resulted in significant loss of life and environmental devastation. While estimates vary, it is believed that tens of thousands of Iraqi soldiers and civilians were killed during the conflict. The coalition forces, on the other hand, suffered relatively few casualties.
The environmental damage caused by the war was also substantial. The retreating Iraqi forces deliberately set fire to hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells, creating an ecological disaster. The oil well fires, which burned for months, released millions of tons of toxic smoke into the atmosphere, causing widespread air pollution and respiratory problems.
Section 9. Regional implications, shifting alliances, and power dynamics. The Gulf War had profound geopolitical implications for the Middle East, reshaping alliances and altering the regional balance of power. The war demonstrated the United States' overwhelming military superiority and its willingness to use force to protect its interests in the region.
The war led to a realignment of alliances in the region. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, once wary of US involvement, became more reliant on the United States for their security. This paved the way for a permanent US military presence in the Gulf, which continues to this day. The war also had a significant impact on the Arab-Israeli conflict. The international community, in the aftermath of the war, launched a renewed effort to resolve the conflict, leading to the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991.
Section 10. The Gulf War's legacy, a reshaped Middle East. The Gulf War's legacy continues to shape the Middle East today. The war marked the beginning of a new era of U.S. military interventionism in the region, which would have far-reaching consequences.
The war's legacy is complex and contested. While it succeeded in liberating Kuwait and halting Iraqi aggression, it also left behind a legacy of instability and resentment. The war's aftermath saw the rise of new threats, including terrorism and sectarian violence, which continue to plague the region today. The war demonstrated the limits of military power and the importance of diplomacy and international cooperation in addressing complex global challenges.
Section 11. Conclusion. Lessons from the invasion. The Iraqi invasion of Kuwait serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression. The international community's swift and decisive response to the invasion demonstrated the importance of collective security and the need for a rules-based international order. The war also highlighted the complex interplay of factors, including economic desperation, political ambition, and historical grievances that can lead to conflict. The legacy of the Gulf War continues to shape the Middle East today, serving as a cautionary tale about the human cost of war and the importance of pursuing peaceful solutions to international disputes. As we reflect on the 30th anniversary of the Gulf War, it is essential to remember the lessons learned and to work towards a more peaceful and just world.